Welcome, beautiful mamas. I am your host, Shay Harrison. This podcast is a place for Springfield and local surrounding area mamas to share their stories about life, motherhood, and everything in between, completely judgment-free. I am so excited to be able to share these stories with you and give women an opportunity to be heard. So if you're ready to laugh, open your mind, and be part of a supportive sharing community, let's crack on. Hello and welcome to the podcast. How are you feeling?
Good, thank you.
Good. Alrighty, I'll get you to just introduce yourself and your story and we will crack on.
Okay, I'm Eloise. I am turning 34 this year. I always have to think about how old I am.
I feel like I'm 23 still. I even had to say to Harry the other day, how old do you feel? So I understand that.
Oh, I still think I'm 21, but then
Bend over?
No, yeah. I have an 11-month-old son, Jackson, who is earthside with us and sitting here for this. And he has an identical twin brother, Angus, who is looking down from us up above. And that's part of my story today. So my husband and I got married in early November 2020 after getting engaged very romantically in Austria at Christmas Eve of the previous year.
Oh, wow.
And
so did you get married in the pandemic?
Yes.
How was that?
We were supposed to have our engagement party the weekend in March when the world ended.
Yes. No, you're right.
When the world ended, so our engagement party was cancelled. And then our wedding fell on the weekend in November where like the Wednesday restrictions had been lifted.
Was this in Brisbane?
In Brisbane, yeah. So we'd had to change our venue, so we changed and we ended up getting married and having our reception at City Hall.
Oh, okay then.
And my cousins from New South Wales were able to fly up, which was amazing. We could have people sitting at the table, and the best part was we could have people dancing and mingling at the wedding. So we were in this really short window because I think like 2 weeks later, everything closed again.
Oh, wow.
So we were really lucky, and it was a great wedding. Like I think everyone was just so desperate to have a party.
Yeah.
That everyone just got out, let loose, and had a great night. So that was really exciting.
Yes.
And then 2 weeks later, I had a week off work either side of the wedding. We didn't have a honeymoon. We just sort of chilled at home for the week, which was nice. And then 2 weeks later on the Monday, I hadn't been feeling really well at work that day. And I thought I was really anxious about a meeting that I was involved with. The meeting came and went, and the unwell feeling did not go away.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it was, but on the way walking back to the car that night, I stopped at the chemist and got a pregnancy test.
Yeah.
And I'd never bought a pregnancy test before, so I bought the one that told you how many weeks you were.
Yes.
Because I was like, won't be that many weeks. Like, this will be an extreme fluke.
Yeah.
And I took the pregnancy test when I got home, and it said 3+ weeks.
Wow.
And in my head, I'm like, the wedding was only 2 weeks ago.
Oh, well.
It was about 5 to 6, and my husband wasn't home yet because he usually works really long days.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what to do, so I went to boot camp.
Good.
It wasn't your boot camp.
No, it
at
was
the
not
time.
my boot camp.
It was a different boot camp, but I was like, I just don't know what to do. So I went to boot camp, and the trainer actually said to me during it, he said, Eloise, are you all right? Like, you're not really like you use yourself tonight. I was like, yeah, I just, not
bit
feeling
distracted,
the best.
Yeah.
So did some form of exercise, came home, and my husband came home early that night, which was quite a shock.
Were you expecting him to come home early?
No, I was expecting him sort of anywhere between 9 and 10 p.m.
Oh, wow,
home.
that is late.
Yeah. And I said, I have something to show you. And showed him the pregnancy test.
Yeah.
That said 3+ weeks.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, right. He took it really well.
Were you trying? Were you anticipating trying or?
I had gone off contraception the November of the year prior, before we'd gotten engaged, and we were just going to sort of see what happened.
Yeah.
When I came when we came back from our holiday engaged, a good friend said to me, maybe you might want to think about using protection until you get married, because you probably don't want to have either just had a baby or be pregnant at your wedding.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh, that's really good advice.
Yeah, thanks. I'll jot that down.
So we did that up until October.
Oh my God. So close.
Yeah.
So close.
Yeah, and well, I was like, it's not going to happen that quickly.
Oh, I thought the same thing.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it to happen that quickly. So we went to the doctor on the Wednesday, got blood tests. It was too early. She dated us at just over 6 weeks. I'm like, okay, right.
It's getting further along.
Yeah. By this stage, I'm feeling really unwell each day as we're getting I'm just terrible nausea.
Yeah.
Not so much vomiting, just not feeling very well at all.
It's like a hangover, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just that never goes away.
Yeah. And you didn't get the fun night, like the night before.
No. Although I had a fun 6 weeks.
Oh.
So
yeah, good, worth it.
Yeah. Then got the blood test back, and the doctor, she didn't really draw any conclusions, but she said, oh, your HCG levels are really high.
Yeah.
I said, oh, okay. Oh, the night that I found out I was pregnant, this is an important part of the story.
Yeah.
So my grandmother had fraternal twins.
Yes, okay.
And the night that I found out I was pregnant, I actually Googled symptoms of twin pregnancy.
Yeah.
I know many people will be like, oh, you're just making that up kind of thing. But I did. I legitimately Googled, are there any separate symptoms for twin pregnancy?
Yeah.
And some of the factors are being over 30.
Yeah.
And being overweight.
Yeah. And
I was like, oh, okay, well, 2 out of 3. Also, African-American population, women are more common to have twins. I obviously don't fit that category.
Eloise is blonde and blue-eyed. So, I mean, there might be a throwback in there that we're not aware of, but aesthetically, it's not something that jumps from front of mind.
The furthest from that nationality.
Yeah.
We then had the ultrasound at 7 weeks and 4 days. So the doctor said, push it out for as long as you can. So, and like all these things that you don't realise with pregnancy, that they can't necessarily find the baby until a certain stage.
Yeah.
So I went and had an ultrasound, and
at 7 weeks.
At 7 weeks and 4 days. So this is sort of this was
quite early,
late November.
Yeah.
And the sonographer said, "Oh, I can see a shadow, but I can't see what's in the shadow. Can I do an internal exam?"
Yep.
So she left the room, and I said to my husband, if she comes back and says there's 2 of them, are you going to be okay? Like, you're not going to faint or anything, are you?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I'll be fine. And he's like, what do you mean there'll be 2? And I'm like, well, she's saying like she can see something.
Yeah.
So she came back and did the internal, and she said, yeah, there's a second baby there.
Oh.
So...
How did your husband feel? What did he do? Was he okay?
He was all right. Yeah, we were both
you
all
okay?
right. Yeah,
okay.
we both... I think I'd always sort of had this inkling that there was going to be 2.
Yeah.
I'm not sure at what stage we discovered they were identical. So the boys are identical, which means one egg was fertilised and it was split. And they shared a placenta, which is what caused some issues through the pregnancy.
Yeah.
But we got through... We told our parents sort of early December. Anybody who knows me knows that my family loves a glass of wine.
Yeah. And
we were visiting my parents for a weekend, and we basically had to tell them, because if I'd said I wasn't drinking, that would have been a dead giveaway. Yeah. So we had a little onesie printed that said, baby Longland coming June, July, and at that stage, when I'd ordered the onesie, there was only one baby. So my husband had a Post-it note that said ×2 and handed that to my mum as well. Oh, that's cute though. So there was a lot of excitement. So we got...
How many weeks were you, at that point?
About 8.
Okay then.
Yeah. About 8. So we got through Christmas. By Christmas, I was really close to 12. So we'd seen family in the lead up to Christmas. So we'd shared the news with family. And then by early January, we were starting to share the news with friends.
Yep.
Mid-February, because our anniversary of becoming a couple is 2 days before Valentine's Day. So I had put up on social media on our anniversary date that we were pregnant with twins.
Yeah.
And so Shane and I had been together for 9 years.
Yeah.
On that date, and we put up, twins coming. And then the next weekend, we only had one baby left. So in the space of the week, so I was having fortnightly scans at the Ipswich Hospital. We were public patients for this pregnancy. And I had been for a scan on the Monday of that week, and the amazing obstetrician who reviewed my scans, she took ages to come back. And she said, I've been on the phone trying to get you an appointment at the Mater to go for a scan at the Mater. With identical twin pregnancies, one of the biggest complications is that the twins can develop a condition called twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. And so what it is where arteries form between the two babies. So they're both connected to the placenta. They both have their own connection. But then they also decide
umbilical cord.
Yes, sorry. Yes, so they both have their own umbilical cord, and that's connected to the placenta.
Yeah.
But then they also develop these blood vessels and arteries that go between the two babies.
Yeah.
And they start sharing.
Does that happen with every identical pregnancy?
1 in 5.
Okay.
1 in 5. And so...
That's quite common though.
Yes, but identical twin pregnancies aren't as common as what you would think.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. So and with these arteries, they start to share nutrients and blood between the two of them.
Yeah.
And so at this stage, she hadn't said that was what she was concerned about. She said, I just want to send you for a precautionary check.
Yep.
So that was on the Monday. I got a phone call, I think, from the Mater on the Wednesday saying they had an appointment Friday lunchtime for me. So I went to work. I work in the city. I went to work. Shane picked me up from work and dropped me over at the hospital, but he couldn't stay because he runs his own taxi, so he had jobs on that he had to go and do. And I walked into the hospital, into the women's hospital, Mater Mothers.
Yep.
And I went up to the floor where the ultrasound was, and I went to the normal ultrasound place where normal women go for their ultrasounds. Yeah. And they said, oh no, you're around in the maternal fetal medicine section.
Because of twins?
That's where my referral was, because the maternal fetal medicine section, they deal with all sorts of high-risk pregnancies and when issues present with the babies. Yeah. So they're an amazing team of specialists and sonographers. So I went and checked in there, and I just burst into tears in the waiting room. I felt so overwhelmed. Yeah. And I kind of sort of thought something wasn't right. So they were running late too. And I get really... It's silly now that I'm a mother, but I used to get really anxious about missing work. I had the time off to go and have the scan, but in my head I was like, well, I had sort of set aside an hour or an hour and a half for the scan, and they're late.
No, I totally understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even late for work. I'm like,
I hate it.
Your car accident, out of your control.
Yeah.
But, I'm late.
Yeah.
Should have accounted for this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I should have known. Yeah. So, had the scan, and the sonographer was absolutely lovely, and she said, you need to wait. I need to go and get the doctor. And the doctor came in, Dr. Joseph, and he said, I can't really even remember what he said, but it went something along the lines of, you have twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. It's progressed to stage 3. We need to operate today.
Oh, wow.
And we met this, I met this amazing, the senior midwife for the maternal fetal medicine, Barb. And she was like, you're having surgery today, so what do you need to do to get ready and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, my car's at the Maya Centre, all of my stuff's at work, and...
At this stage, did you know what the surgery was for?
So I've jumped ahead a little bit. So we'd had a conversation. Yeah, they'd taken me into the conference room, and Dr. Joseph and Barb had come in and had started to explain to me what was happening. So they had said that these arteries had formed, and what was happening was that Angus was the donor, considered the donor baby, and Jackson was the recipient baby. So basically, all of the nutrients and blood that Angus was delivering to Jackson was making both of the babies sick. Angus hadn't really shown much growth, and it was evident that he was very, like, the equivalent of undernourished.
Okay. Sorry, how many weeks were you at this stage?
I was 18 weeks and 5 days.
Okay, yep.
So twin to twin usually presents itself around the 16 to 20 week mark.
Yep.
And there are varying stages of seriousness of it.
Yeah.
The lower sort of stage 1, stage 2, you can be monitored, but sort of 3 and onwards, if the babies aren't viable for delivery, then this laser surgery, which was what I ended up having, is the option.
Yeah, okay.
So Angus was in effect undernourished.
Yep.
And Jackson was overnourished to the point where he was showing issues with his heart from having received too much fluid and blood. So his heart was working overtime. His bladder was quite large, and because he was taking on so much more fluid.
Yeah.
So neither baby was really well.
Yeah.
So what Dr. Joseph said was, you will need to have, well, you don't need to have, but the option is...
They'll never force you.
No. The option is for you to have laser ablation surgery, which is a keyhole surgery through the abdomen into the womb, and they laser the arteries that have formed between the two babies. There was a... I'll just make sure I get the percentages right.
No, you're right.
25% chance one baby would be saved, and a 15% chance both babies would be saved as a result of the surgery.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm sitting in a conference room. I've got Shane on speaker while he's out driving.
Yeah.
The doctor's explaining what's happening.
Yeah.
And they're like, yep, you're going into surgery this afternoon. When was the last time you ate? We've got to work out how far, like how many hours. And then I had my panic about like the car. I was like worried like the car was going to get towed because it was in at the Maya Centre and all this sort of stuff. So the midwife said, you've got 45 minutes to go from the MARTA back to work, get what you need, get your car and come back. But she said, but I don't want you to stress. So if it's 46 minutes, that's okay.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. So I get back to work, pack up my stuff. I'm walking to get my car and I ring my mum to tell my mum what's happening. And at the time, my dad wasn't very well. He'd been in hospital for 4 weeks. And he also needed to have heart surgery later on in the year. And I was terrified that my news would cause him to have a heart attack.
Oh my gosh.
Fortunately, it did it. And he was also seeing his cardiac surgeon at the time I rang my mum. So she delivered the news while he was with the doctor in case anything happened.
Yeah.
But I went via Coles and bought a toothbrush and toothpaste and a packet of undies because I was like, I have nothing to take with me to hospital.
They're necessities.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say a cake.
No.
I would have wanted to have gone and bought a cake.
No, I bought toothbrush, toothpaste and a packet of undies.
Yeah.
And maybe a packet of socks because I know I get cold in air conditioning. But because I had nothing. I had the clothes that I'd worn to work and I didn't want Shane to be ferrying underwear back for me.
Yeah.
So I got back to the hospital. I think it was about 3:00. Then we had a couple of hours of doing all my paperwork. Shane was able to get to the hospital about 5, and then it was just waiting. The surgery took about 2 hours, and they don't put you fully under. They start with, I think, what's a twilight anaesthetic, so you're still awake. But they did say you will feel the needle and stuff going in because we can only numb the outer layer. Like they can't numb the inner layers of... and I did feel them pulling, and I feel like at one stage I twitched, and after that I think they actually put me out for a bit of time.
Yeah.
But some things with
It's unusual they don't fully sedate you. Not unusual. I mean, like, I don't know what the process is, but
The doctor said that some women watch it.
really,
You could see, and I was like, I don't think I could handle that. So, yeah. But like things that I never thought of in a pregnancy, because the doctor said, if you start to miscarry while we're doing this surgery, I can't stop it.
Okay.
And I was really taken back by that. And he's like, well, babies aren't medically viable until 24 weeks.
Yeah.
So if you start to miscarry, there isn't anything we can do for the baby.
Yeah.
I was being given medication to prevent miscarriage.
And that was for a chance for both of them?
Yes. Well, yeah, because the needle was going to go into the womb and through the stuff that's in there.
Yeah.
Are you quite right? Yeah. Could you remember? That could have triggered triggered early labour and triggered the miscarriage. But I was being given medication for to try and prevent miscarriage.
Yeah.
So I had the surgery. The doctor did an ultrasound after the surgery, and there were still 2 heartbeats. And he said, I'll be back tomorrow on the Saturday to do an ultrasound, and we'll see what's happened. He said some of the arteries are really quite large, and like, speaking like millimeters, but in the
little
context,
babies, yeah.
in the context of the womb and babies, yeah, they were quite large.
Yeah.
And he'd had to laser them in a number of places to try and prevent them from growing back.
Okay.
Which is a possibility. So went back up to the hospital room. Shane was still there. He left after a few hours. I sent him home. He needed to come home and have a sleep.
Yeah.
I hate being in hospital, so I pretty much cried all night.
Oh, you poor thing.
He came back the next morning, and about midday, we went down for a scan.
Yeah.
And the doctor who'd done our surgery, who we have become very fond of, Dr. Joseph, he did the scan that morning or that lunchtime. And by that stage, Angus no longer had a heartbeat. So the effects of the twin had become too great for him. He had given so much of the nutrients that his heart just couldn't handle not being connected anymore. And Jackson's heart was still beating, but it still was very concerning with the amount of fluid that was still around his heart. So
was your husband there when they told you that?
Shane was with me.
Yeah.
Shane was with me. We went back up to the ward, and my mum and dad had not long arrived, so the nurses had moved me into a private room, and Shane went and got my parents and told them what had happened. So they live in Toowoomba, so Dad had been discharged from hospital on the Saturday morning, and they'd pretty much gotten in the car and driven straight to Brisbane. And then they left for a little while, and then Shane's parents came to see us. And then they left, and then sort of Shane and I we had another night in the hospital, and even though Shane was with me, I pretty much cried all night again because I hate being in hospital, and it was even worse on the Saturday night.
It's not often you go to hospital for good times.
No. One of the things that the midwife had said to me on the Friday was that after the surgery I'd have 2 weeks off work, which to me I was like, I don't like going into it. I was like, I don't need 2 weeks off work. That's fine. And I mean, I've never had 2 weeks off work where it hasn't been for a holiday.
Yeah.
And so I was discharged on the Sunday, and the doctor said, I'll see you during the week for another scan. So at that stage, the doctor said we'd have weekly scans to continue to check on Jackson. So I had the 2 weeks off work, and Shane was here for most of the 2 weeks. He would occasionally come and go if he had some jobs to do. My mum and dad came for an odd day here and there. Friends dropped off food and visited, which was lovely. And then so at the end of the 2 weeks, Jackson's heart was still beating. It was starting to show some improvement. The fluid was starting to reduce around his heart. and I went back to work, which became a good distraction.
Yeah.
I worked very long days, and some days I'd cry on the way into work, and other days I'd cry when I got in the car leaving work. I hadn't told very many people at work what had happened. They all knew I was having twins, and then I disappeared for 2 weeks, and then came back and just never really felt like myself again. Yeah. I never felt as pregnant as I did the Friday that I lost, like that I had the surgery. I was showing some symptoms of twin to twin that I had never actually really been informed what symptoms were. And I never felt as pregnant again as what I did that day. Like, I felt huge that day. I was retaining a lot of fluid, which is a symptom of twin to twin. So I went back to work. We got to 24 weeks. And around that time, the doctor said we could go to fortnightly scans because Jackson was showing such good improvement. And as a singleton pregnancy, which cut a little bit deep, he was doing really well. We got to maybe 28 weeks. And he said, you can go to monthly scans now if you want. I said, I politely decline.
Yeah, absolutely. Any extra scan you can get.
Yeah, I would like to continue to keep coming.
I'd like a daily scan.
Yeah. He's like, that's fine. So I actually would end up having the day off work of the scan.
Yeah.
I just, particularly in the early weeks, the emotional toll.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the night before, just wouldn't sleep, and then the day waiting, and just that big sigh of relief once they put the wand on my belly and they were like, yep, he's got a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Just so much relief. So I would usually have the full day off work because I just couldn't concentrate, and I'd come home and I'd just sleep because I was just so emotionally exhausted. So we continued with our fortnightly scans. They were getting ready for the next scan that I was due to have at 32 weeks and 4 days. He was going to have a cardiologist person come and check Jackson's heart. Yep. The doctor had been trying to check it in the previous fortnightly scans, but Jackson had this innate ability to be able to hide both his face and his heart in every scan.
Convenient.
We basically never had a scan where we could see his face. And his heart was pretty much always hidden, so he was made it quite difficult for the scans.
I've heard of babies hiding their faces, but their hiding their heart's not something.
He was always in a position that they could never really get the front of it.
Yeah.
So occasionally in some of our scans, we would ask to see Angus. Obviously, we knew that there wasn't much to see of Angus, but it was just nice and important to us to see him.
Yeah.
So we were gearing up for the next scan to be at 32 weeks and 4 days. The weekend leading into that week, Shane put the car seat in my car. I was in the garage fiddling around with our deluxe bugaboo donkey pram that Shane wanted.
Yeah.
And didn't never considered how heavy it would be for somebody to lift it in and out of the car.
Yeah, that's what lots of people said. Yeah. They're quite heavy.
I mean, they're fabulous prams, but they're heavy. So I'm 32 weeks pregnant, practicing lifting the pram in and out of the car.
Yeah.
And I started to get these pains.
Yeah.
And this is after Saturday afternoon. And they weren't constant. Can we just pause? They'd started sort of mid-afternoon. They were infrequent, but they were there enough to know that they were there. Mm-hmm. And I don't even really know how to describe them. They were literally just that your belly was tightening. Mm-hmm. So they continued off and on Saturday afternoon. Saturday night, Shane and I were sitting watching the rugby union, and he had to go and pick up a client from the rugby union, and he was a bit worried about leaving, and I was like, look, so if it gets worse, I'll call an ambulance and you can just meet us at the hospital. There's nothing happening. It's just this funny pain.
Were you now booked into the Mater, or were you still birthing
Yes.
through Ipswich?
No, we had asked for our care to be transferred to the Mater.
Yep.
After we had the surgery.
Yep.
So we were at the Mater.
Yep.
Nothing much happened. They just continued, but I went to bed that night, and I don't even know how frequently it was that I was waking up, but I felt like I was frequently waking up with these tightening pains.
Yeah.
At about 3:30, I was like to Shane, I think maybe we should go to the hospital.
He was home by this
Oh
point.
yeah, he was home. He'd only been out for about an hour.
Okay.
When he went to pick up the passenger.
Yeah.
I was like, I think we should go to the hospital and get these checked. Like, they haven't stopped.
Yeah.
I don't really feel like they're getting worse, but I feel like they're getting more frequent.
Yeah.
So I got in the hospital about 4:00 and they hooked me up. And they were like, oh no, it's these that they are called tightenings. But you could see a contraction on the monitor. Like, I didn't really know what I was looking at. It was first time baby.
Oh yeah.
But like you could see these blips on the monitors.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, the baby's fine, your heart rate's all fine. They went and did an internal, and they're like, no, your cervix is still high and closed. So by this time, we got discharged at 8 a.m. on the Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. So I was 32 weeks on the Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
We came home and had 2 2-hour antenatal classes to do. They were online ones. So the first one was the breastfeeding one, which I slept through, but fortunately Shane paid attention, so I was able to fill me in.
Yeah.
Then we had an hour's break. Oh, they sent me home with Panadol. They gave me 2 Panadol and said, take this when I was leaving.
Yeah, yeah.
If the pain comes back, you can have more Panadol.
Good.
But if it gets worse, come back to the hospital.
Okay,
I was
good.
like, oh, okay. So I came home, pain kind of went away for a little while.
As a result of the Panadol?
So we finished the first class at 11 a.m. We basically both went to bed and slept for an hour before the next one. By then the pain had started to come back. So we're sitting listening to the next antenatal class, and I'm not feeling really comfortable. We're both exhausted. That one finished at 2, and we were like, right, let's just go to bed. Let's go and sleep. So I went to bed, and about 2:20 I just got this almighty pain in my back that just radiated down my back into my pelvis, and I was laying down and I just had to stand up. I couldn't get rid of it, so I'm bending over the vanity in the bathroom, and Shane's rubbing my back, and it just went on and on and on.
As a consistent pain?
Pain, yeah. Then it eventually went away. Then I'm not really sure what happened between the period of it going away, but then at 3:00 I was standing back at the vanity and my waters broke.
Oh, wow.
And I'd had my hospital backpack for a few weeks.
Yeah.
And I said to Shane, I was like, oh, I think my waters have just broken. And he's like, oh, what makes you think that? And I was like, oh, I felt a rush of water.
The whole lot of water that's on the floor.
So I'm like, right, let's go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So he drove very quickly to the Mater. We got there about 3:30, 20 to 4, and I went into the assessment centre and I said, oh, you go park. Yeah. I'll be right. Walked in and checked in, and the ladies on the desk looked at me, and I was like, yeah, I was here this morning, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I'm like, okay. Sitting in, I'm like, contractions were happening the whole drive to the hospital. Yes. They were very frequent. I'm sitting in a chair waiting for somebody to come out and get me, and this midwife comes out and she goes, oh, are you in labour? And I was like, I'm pretty sure I am. Never been here before, but I'm pretty sure this is what labour is. And she's like, oh, okay. And she took me off to her room, and she's like, well, what makes you think your waters broke? And I was like, well, I felt it. Yeah. And she didn't really believe me, but I had a pad on, and so they took that and she tested that, and she's like, yeah, your waters have broken. Yeah. Hooked me up to a machine, and contractions were still happening. Yeah. I was having sort of 3 in the space of 10 minutes. So by now it's about 4:00, and they've started to realise that Jackson's 32 weeks. They know my history. Yeah. I was in there in the morning. One of the nurse who had been with me when I'd had my internal done. Yeah. She came in and she was like, I thought I recognised the name. I was like, yeah, I'm back. Yeah. Yeah. Hi. They took me to a birthing suite. And my contractions were still happening. They were intensifying. A doctor from the pediatric, like from the special care team, came down and spoke to us and said, we're going to be set up in the room right next door to you. As soon as the baby's delivered, we will be taking it.
Yeah, okay.
And they had given me a steroid shot in the first room that they'd taken me to, in the hopes that my labour would take 12 hours and they could have given me a second one.
Yeah.
The steroid shot was to try and help his lung development because he was still early.
Yeah.
And by 5:45, both boys were born. Wow. So it had been a 2-hour and 44-minute labour from the time my waters broke to when I had delivered.
Yeah.
I didn't really have any time to think about the delivery of Angus, and because Jackson had been born so early, we had never really had those conversations with like the bereavement team at the hospital or the midwives around how I would deliver Angus.
Yes.
But Jackson actually brought Angus out with him.
Oh, wow.
He had his umbilical cord wrapped around his hand, and my husband saw the boys be delivered and told me that.
Oh, wow.
Jackson cried when he came out, which was amazing to hear.
Yeah.
And then pretty much the doctor, the pediatric baby team took Jackson and Shane cut the umbilical cord. They took Jackson next door.
Yeah.
Shane was really torn, like, where do I go? And the doctor was like, you can come with us. So he went with Jackson.
Yeah.
The doctor came back about 15 minutes later and was like, and Shane was with him and was like, do you have a name? And we were like, Jackson?
Yeah.
Jackson was Shane's pick.
Yeah.
And
he looks like a Jackson.
Yeah, it suits him really well.
It does. Yeah.
And so then I was just in the delivery room. All I had was gas.
Yeah, wow.
Again, one of the naive things, like, you know, going into pregnancy, yes, I want all the drugs, I want an epidural.
Yeah.
Never realised that an epidural actually made you lose, like, your feeling and the ability to walk. And I had a real issue with not being able to be in control of my body. So I had said to Shane, I like epidural as an absolute last resort. I don't want one. If I'm handling it, that's fine.
Yeah.
A nurse or a doctor stuck their head in maybe 10, 15 minutes before I actually gave birth and said, has she had an epidural? And the nurses were like, oh, we haven't asked her. I was like, no. And then I pretty much in the next breath, I was like, I need to push.
Yeah, wow.
So there wouldn't have really been any time for an epidural anyway.
No. They take a while.
Yeah. So like it was just this whirlwind.
Yeah.
Then the midwives are inspecting me. I had, even though he was only 4 pounds, so he was 1,800 grams.
Wow.
I still had a grade 2 tear.
Yep.
And they suspect that that's because not only did he have Angus with him, but he also had his hands over his face when he came in.
Ah, what a cherub.
Yeah, so he had like, you know, a little bit of extra like face, which may have helped. Yeah. And the most weirdest thing, so I'm in the room with the nurses.
Yeah.
Shane's next door, and they said, oh, you know, they gave me some medication to help deliver the placenta.
Yeah.
And the nurse was like, oh, I don't want to pull it because the placenta cord like is still really thin because she's really early. And she's like, do you think you could like feel up to walking to the toilet to see if like you can push it out?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. So I got up from the bed, walked to the toilet. Yeah. I'd had a cold 2 weeks earlier, so I still had this residual cough.
Oh my goodness.
She's holding the kidney dish with like the umbilical cord and like the clamps and stuff.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, do you want me to go? And I'm like, well, it's not like you haven't just seen everything. I was like, you can stay.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, it's all right. Like, I'll give you a bit of privacy. Hold this. Like, literally, she turned around, I coughed, and my placenta fell in the toilet, and everything from the instrument dish was in the toilet. I was like, it's out.
Come back. I'm finished.
It was such a weird thing. And then I walked back to the bed, and, like, there's just blood everywhere.
Oh, wow.
All over the floor.
You've done well to walk then.
So they get me back up on the bed, and then the obstetrician on call came in, and she was trying to deliver, I think it's the afterbirth. Now, I may have the sequence out in terms of the placenta and the afterbirth, but she was pushing down on my stomach, and I must have pulled a muscle on the right side of my stomach, because the pain of her pushing on my stomach was excruciating. It was worse than the labour. Like, I was just in agony. Like, I had to tell her to stop. Like, they like, here, have the gas. The gas isn't doing anything. Like, you've got it, like, she's like, I can't stop. Like, you have to pass the afterbirth. But it was just, the pain was just excruciating.
Yeah.
So after a little while, she eventually stopped. She obviously figured enough had come out and whatnot.
If you've just birthed two humans,
Yeah.
one with fingers over their face, and that's what's causing you to ask to stop.
Yeah. So they stitched me up. They let me go into the bathroom and sort of like wash off my lower half, which was very nice. And then I was in the room with the delivery nurses, and they had wrapped up Angus in a blanket, and I had always said to Shane, I'm not really sure if I want to see Angus.
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, I will come to regret that at a later stage in life.
Yeah. You can't go back.
No, that's right. And I didn't have anyone else because Shane was with Jackson, and Shane, when they took Jackson up to the NICU, Shane went with him.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember them telling me they were moving him up to the NICU. I think Shane came back and said, like, he's okay.
Yeah.
And maybe brought a photo. He'd taken a photo of him. Because, like, I didn't, like, they held him up and then they took him away. Like, I hadn't even touched him. Yeah. And, like, you know, there was so much else that I was processing that I don't even remember seeing him when they held him up.
Yeah.
I just remember Shane saying, like, he's come out and he's got Angus, and and he cried.
Yeah.
And so I held Angus while the nurses did everything that they needed to do.
Yeah.
Shane came back down after maybe an hour or so, and we kind of processed what had happened.
Yeah.
And then we started making the phone calls. We rang my parents. And ironically, my dad was only 2 weeks post open heart surgery that stage. So again, I was worried about panicking him and worrying him.
Yeah.
And we rang Shane's parents, and my sister passed away when we were quite young. So I don't have any other siblings, and Shane isn't close with any of his. So it was just sort of the parents to ring, and then some friends.
Yeah.
And then our parents shared the news with all of our relatives and aunts and uncles and cousins. But also Jackson and Angus were born on one of my very special cousins' birthdays.
Yeah.
And also another cousin from the same side, their wedding anniversary. So it wasn't already a busy enough day.
Add some more in. Why not?
Got another birthday to add to the day.
Yeah.
So after they kept me in the delivery room or in the birthing suite for hours because my pulse was really erratic and it was quite high. Everything else, like my blood pressure and everything, all through delivery had been completely fine, completely normal. But my pulse and so they were worried that I had developed an infection.
Oh, okay then. So
they kept me in there until about 10 o'clock. And then they finally took me up to the ward. And, you know, they started to talk about, like, you know, going down to the NICU and like, I was like, oh my God, it's 11 o'clock at night. Like, you can't go and wake a baby or see a baby at that time. And they're like, no, you can go, you're right. You can go to the NICU at any time.
Yeah. It's your baby.
Yeah. But, like,
You've got business mind on still.
It was so foreign. Well, I finished work at 6 o'clock on the Friday night, and by 6 p.m. on the Sunday night, I was a mother.
Yeah.
In the space of 48 hours, I went from being not that I'm not still a professional, but a working professional to a mother.
Yeah.
And it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
And we're having a morning tea for me on the Monday for my baby,
send off
baby. Yeah. I still had 2 more weeks of work.
Wow. No.
So we went down to the NICU, and as we were walking down the halls of the ward I was on, the doctor who had seen me on the Sunday morning was on the ward.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, baby's here.
Yeah.
And she said, I heard. She said, like, there is no way that I thought I would be seeing you tonight. Like,
Yeah.
your cervix was high and closed. Like, there was
Yeah.
no signs. But
They knew they wanted to come.
one of the possibilities with having the laser surgery is that it can bring on an early labour.
Oh, okay then.
The median time frame is 10 weeks. Is
Post-surgery.
post-surgery, yeah. So we were pretty lucky to get 13 weeks.
Yeah.
And get a very healthy baby at the
Yes.
end of it. So went to NICU and Jackson was tiny. Like, Shane has quite large hands and his hand pretty much covered all of Jackson.
Just one hand?
Yeah, one hand.
Wow.
He was tiny. He had a CPAP mask on. He was in a crib, like one of those humidity cribs that was completely cut, like the plastic perspex.
Yeah.
He had needles in his arms. He had monitors on his feet. The nurse was like, you can touch him, but you have to wash your hands really thoroughly. And like, tomorrow when you come down, don't have your wedding rings on and all that sort of stuff, and bracelets. So like, we need to minimise the risk of infection. And I was like, oh my God, like.
Yeah.
So we didn't stay very long with him that night. But we went and back up to the room. Shane stayed with me the night. The nurse was like, oh, it wouldn't normally do this. I was like, oh. Come on, give us a break. So Shane stayed the night. They had given us, we were still obviously public patients, but we were in a room. It was a two-bed room, but there was no other patient in there. There was just us. And also too, with infant loss, they actually record it with a purple butterfly. So I had a purple butterfly on my room door. There was a purple butterfly on Jackson's crib. And he was... we were very adamant that we wanted him recorded as a twin on all of the paperwork. Yeah. So he was twin 2 of 2 because he had always been our twin B. So, like his little tags in hospital said twin 2 of 2 and all of the paperwork. We have a birth certificate and death certificate for Angus, and he's recorded as a baby. So then Jackson spent about 32 hours in the intensive care unit of special care, just basically being monitored. The CPAP machine wasn't for anything else but just to help his lungs sort of catch up. He was able to breathe on his own. It was just taking off a bit of the pressure. He was then transferred into the special care nursery. He was still in the isolate, so the crib with all of the sides on it, because he had a lot of trouble regulating his temperature. It was quite low, which isn't uncommon for a preemie baby. And I was discharged on the Wednesday. I had said that I wanted to go home on the Tuesday, but I pretty much cried all day, and the doctor who saw me on the Tuesday morning had said, well, if you want to go, you can go, but I really don't think you should. And that afternoon I saw a nurse and I was like, no, I think I need to stay. It was like, and it wasn't really for any reason in particular. Like, there was so, and I think like it was the actual physically leaving the hospital, leaving Angus and Jackson there. Because by this stage Angus was in the morgue at the hospital. We had amazing bereavement midwives at the Mater who had been with us since we had lost Angus during the pregnancy. So they were regularly checking on us when I was still a patient, and then they would come and see us at least once a week when Jackson was in special care. And we had an amazing social worker and the midwife who had seen me right on the day of the scan at the Mater. She continually came to check on us. So I came home on the Wednesday, and it is, I don't know what the feeling is like of leaving with your baby after you've just had them. But the feeling of walking out of the hospital, carrying a bunch of flowers with a balloon that says it's a boy and no baby is the weirdest, saddest feeling in the whole world. My mum had come down on the Wednesday to meet her first grandson, first grandchild. And so she and Shane were like carrying my bags, and I had a pillow and a bunch of flowers, and we got in the car to drive home, and it was just the weirdest feeling. And Shane and I got home, and my mum left not long after we got home, and we kind of just sat there and we were like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah.
And because the nurses in the special care are just phenomenal, and they were like, it's open 24 hours a day. You can come and go as much as you want. You can ring us all the time.
Yeah.
So we'd gotten home, we'd had a sleep, probably done some washing, we'd eaten dinner, and then about 8:30 we were like, let's go back to the hospital. So we went back, and he had one of our favourite nurses looking after him that night, and she always knew just how to wrap him up. But I'd been able to express some colostrum, and they'd only started to feed him on the Wednesday. They'd started with some formula. He had maybe 2 feeds of formula, and the rest he'd been able to have of breast milk that I was starting to express. But I remember asking the nurse that was looking after him, I was like, oh, how do I know, like, when my milk's come in? Because I'm, like, in a lot of pain. Because, like, nobody had spoken to me about that. Like, I assume if you have a full-term baby or with no complications, when you, like, they come in and tell you about, like, because he couldn't latch. Because, again, another thing with babies is they don't develop their latch skills until between 34 and 36 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so...
Did that surprise you?
So he had an NG tube in, so he was being fed via a syringe.
Yeah.
So the tube was up in his nose and down into his stomach.
Yeah.
So yeah, they don't, again, like, unless you need to know these things, you never really know them. So I said to the nurse, I was like, how do I know, like, if my milk's coming, like, my boobs are killing me? And we had bought a pump because we had been to the pregnancy expo the weekend before I'd had the surgery, and at that stage we were still having twins.
Yeah.
So I'd bought, and it's like, it's just so fortunate that we had a pump. Like, we came home from the hospital and I washed everything that afternoon.
Yeah.
And then we came home after having been back to visit Jackson, and I pumped, and I got milk, and I was like, oh my God. So then, I had to start setting a time, like an alarm to get up and pump. So I was pumping during the night, in the morning, I was pumping at the hospital. So we went to and from the hospital every day for 32 days.
Yeah.
So he was in there for, he came home at 36 weeks and 4 days.
Wow.
So we, on the day, wasn't without its challenges, those 4 and a bit weeks. There was a worry that he'd had developed an infection at one stage because his temperature had gotten quite low. Then after that, once he could stabilise his temperature, we started we were doing a lot of skin to skin cuddling, and we giving him a lot of opportunities to suckle and to try and breastfeed. Then we were offered 2 nights of rooming in, so the equivalent of if you had your baby at full term and your baby was in your room with you. I had 2 nights of staying in the hospital where he was in the room with me, and the nurses from the special care ward would come up and check on us. And the first afternoon that happened, I got really excited because my baby was finally with me properly, and I bathed him and got him dressed, and his temperature plummeted, and he was really drowsy and not unresponsive, but not not waking for feeds. And the nurse kept coming up and taking his temperature, and she was like, no, we've got to take him back down. So he went back into an isolate that night to get his temperature back up, and within half an hour his temp was back up, but they were like, no, he needs to stay down here for the night. So then we tried again the next day, and I was very sternly told not to bath him. I was like, yep, no, got that. Got that. It was probably one of the hardest nights of my life because I didn't realise until a couple of weeks later that he wasn't actually really breastfeeding very well. And there'd been a bit of confusion with the hospital because they had tried to transfer us back to Ipswich, and we had said no, we didn't want to go because Angus was still at the hospital. And we had it set in our mind that we would farewell Angus on the day that Jackson would come home with us. So and farewell in terms of having a funeral home come and pick him up. So that both boys left the hospital on the same day. And I had said that to somebody in the special care nursery, and then there'd been all this sort of confusion around when we wanted to do this. So like in the last week that Jackson was in hospital, he actually didn't put on any weight, but they still sent us home. And so I don't actually think he had been breastfeeding very well. And so the first night that he was actually with us, he was super unsettled and he just cried the whole night because I think he was hungry.
Yeah.
And then when we got him home for like the next 2 weeks, he just cried at night all the time because he was hungry.
Oh.
But during the day, I'd sit on the couch and he'd breastfeed for 2 hours and then he'd sleep for 4 hours and it was amazing.
Yeah.
And then at night, I'd cut him off after an hour because like I was exhausted and he'd be awake within 60 to 90 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
So he came home at 36 weeks and 4 days. He was weighing 2.4 kilos by then. And
wow, it's so small still.
it was tiny.
Yeah.
And then we became family of 3 at home.
Yeah.
And then had to figure it out from there.
Yeah.
But we're now in his birthday month, which is hard to believe.
Yeah.
He's chunky.
He is thriving. You would never ever imagine that he was a little preemie baby.
No, you wouldn't.
Hey.
No. We had some great support with the child health nurses from Queensland Health, so I called myself the frequent flyer. I was down at Orion every Monday getting him weighed and measured, and once we discovered he wasn't putting on weight, I had quite a lot of express milk that was frozen that had been at the hospital for him, because once I started producing milk, I could take it in and they would feed. It became his food.
Yep.
So we came home with one of those like Coles freezer bags full of express milk.
Oh, wow.
Plus what else I'd already had at home, because they got to a point where they were like, stop bringing it in.
We've got enough.
You've got enough,
Yeah.
Your baby actually, like, you're producing 250 mils a pump, but your baby only takes maybe 50 mils a day.
Yeah, wow.
We bottle fed him express milk, and I tried to keep up with pumping but it just got a bit too much in the end. So
you did well though. That's sensational.
Yeah, we had 11 weeks of him on express milk.
That's such an achievement.
Yeah.
Whether it's 1 day, 11 weeks, a year, like you just absolutely smashed it. That's amazing.
Yeah. So, but no, he hasn't gone without. He loves food.
He does. Hey.
So yes, that was our story. It certainly wasn't the first pregnancy I ever thought that we would have.
No.
Shane was amazing through it all. And I remember saying to him at one stage after we lost Angus, I was like, this is your grief as well. Like so many times and I see, like I don't think of Angus as the fact that I had a miscarriage, but so many times I see a lot of women or situations where the father is forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody deals with grief and loss in their own way, and I certainly am not to judge, but I just said to him a couple of times, like, this is your loss as well, and this is your grief. And you can grieve any way that you need to. But we're in this together. And as a husband and as a father, his support was just unwavering. Even when I would be very upset and cranky when we'd leave the hospital of a night time, because I was just so emotional and exhausted, and we'd get home and I'd get short at him for the fact that the washing was inside, which I'd put it inside because it was winter and it wasn't drying any other way. But I just hated the fact that the house just always felt messy because we were never here, because we were always at the hospital, and I just was waiting for that next stage of our journey to start. And of course we just had so much support and love from family and friends, and I've had so much support from the mums that I have met since I've become a mum, which has been amazing, because they don't have to take on my story or my grief. Like they barely knew me, but they've been very open and warm and accepting in listening to me talk about what happened and which has been really special.
That's lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing I hope is that for a future pregnancy is that quick of a delivery.
Yes.
Quick of a labour.
Yes. You champion. Your body was obviously ready.
Ready to go. Yes.
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 Well, thank you so much for coming on. That was just so beautiful. I've just paused it for a second and I had a chat with Eloise. Like, I got shivers at certain points. I wanted to cry at certain points as well. I'm sure that hearing Jackson's little babbling in the background is really going to add to the sincerity of this whole podcast. So thank you so much for sharing your beautiful, beautiful story.
Thank you, Shay.
It's lovely. And yeah, Jackson is absolutely gorgeous. And if anyone who's seen Eloise, they'll know that he's just the happiest, most beautiful little boy. So thank you. And thank you, Jackson, for joining us today.
You were very well behaved.
You were a very good little man.
Yeah.